This'll be a blast from the past. We're gonna look at the first graphics card that I ever bought. Hi everybody, Tech the Weeb here. So, let me paint the picture for you. It's early 2000s in Toronto, Canada. Young Tech the Weeb was into South Park, home movies, and drinking lots of non-diet Pepsi. I was a big PC gamer when I was a little kid. Someday I'll tell the whole story of my history with PC gaming, but until the early 2000s, I hadn't played many PC games in a very long time. But I got to play Half-Life 2 at my friend's house and I was obsessed with that game. I knew the only thing missing in my life was a gaming PC that could play Half-Life 2. Eventually I saved up enough money to buy a PC. It wasn't a fancy gaming PC, but it did come with a graphics card that I was hoping would play some games. This is the card it came with. It's a Radeon HD 5450. It's terrible. It couldn't play any games really. Half-Life 2 sorta played on it, but it wasn't any good at all. It wasn't that amazing PC gaming experience that I really hoped for, but I knew that when I bought the computer. Getting the computer was just phase 1. Phase 2 was upgrading the graphics card. So 2008 rolled around and I was finally ready to bite the bullet. I'd get a graphics card. I'd finally have my own gaming PC. I was so excited to play Half-Life 2, and also some newer games like World of Warcraft and GTA San Andreas. I proudly went to downtown Toronto to the big fancy computer store and picked up this. This is an Nvidia 9800 GT. This is the BFG overclocked model. It wasn't a top-of-the-line graphics card. I'm pretty sure it was like $180, but it was what I could afford, and this is the first time I'd ever researched graphics cards and tried to pick a good one. This is a Tesla card with a 625 megahertz core clock, 512 megabytes of DDR3 VRAM, and dual DVI display ports. And just look at the graphics on the chassis. They don't make them like this anymore. This was from an era where the better the graphics looked on the card itself, the better the card was. Probably. Anyways, I had Half-Life 2 installed on my computer, ready to play immediately when I got the card into my system. I was so excited, you guys. But when I got home and installed the card, I realized I didn't have the power connection for it. Yeah, this thing requires a 450 watt power supply with a 6-pin PCIe power cable, and I couldn't afford a new power supply. Oh my god, you guys, I was so disappointed. You have no idea. I almost cried. Yeah, almost. So I begged my mom to borrow some money, and after a few days I upgraded the power supply too, and then finally, I could play Half-Life 2 on my own computer. And for the next week or so, I literally didn't leave the computer. I think it's safe to say that this was the moment when I bought this Nvidia 9800 GT that I became a true PC gamer. I still played lots of console games over the years, but I'm a PC gamer at heart. And it all started with this card. So, this thing has been sitting in my old PC parts box for over 10 years now. I thought it would be fun to check this old thing out, to see how it runs some old games. Half-Life 2 will be the first on the list for sure. And then we'll try it in a couple new games and see how she holds up. But to give it the best chance that I can, I'm gonna replace the thermal paste on this card, which I'm pretty sure is all old and dried up. Yup, old and crusty. Let's clean this off and put on some new paste. And put it back together, and there we go. Oh, by the way, I did a tutorial on how to do this on my channel recently. There's a link in the description below. Oh, there we go. Alright, let's give this bad boy some time in the spotlight and see what it can do. So we have it installed into my system. I'm running an i7 10700K with 32 gigabytes of RAM on a Z490 motherboard with an SSD. You don't need anything even close to these specs to get the same performance as you'll see here. Even an old i3 2100 or something around there will give you a similar FPS. So, without further ado, let's get into some Half-Life 2. I love that sound. Half-Life 2, ladies and gentlemen, running at 1080p with all the settings cranked. Let's do this. Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. This game was so ahead of its time. It's a bit dated. Obviously, the poly count of the characters is pretty low by today's standards, but at the time, this game just blew everyone away. And not just because of the graphics, but the physics too. You could pick stuff up, chuck it around, and the world, oh, it looked amazing. So realistic compared to all the other games at the time. But the way the game showed you this crazy world through your character's eyes, it has so much going on with the story and so much mystery, and it really made you want to see it through and help these people. I'm telling you, if you haven't played this game yet, then you need to play this game. It's not even optional. So play it. The story, the visuals, the physics, it really held up well over the years, and it's just as worth playing now as it was when it came out. It'll play on pretty much any computer. Even most CPUs with integrated graphics can play this without a graphics card. Just speaking of graphics, take a look at those FPS. We're getting over 150 FPS at max settings, even at 1080p. I don't remember which processor I had when I got this card, but the game definitely didn't play this well for me back then. I'm pretty sure I had a 1024 by 768 monitor. I think it was maybe a 15-inch. Even still, when I finally played this game on my own computer with this brand new 9800 GT, I was in absolute heck-dweeb heaven. I mean, just look at that water. I remember looking at that water for the first time thinking, that is so realistic and games will never have more realistic water than this. Which is silly, obviously, but it did take a very long time before this quality of water graphics was standard in games. I'm gonna test some other games here, I promise. Let's just enjoy a few more uninterrupted moments of this glorious Half-Life 2 gameplay.
Passing on your way to parts unknown.
Uh-oh.
Welcome.
And then I tried Simpsons Hit Run, which I just had on my computer anyway. This is a good game from about that same generation. Runs great, as you could say.
Wasn't part of the deal.
Another game from that generation is GTA San Andreas. Yeah, we're running at 1080p with max settings, and I could get the overlay to show the FPS, but, you know, as you could see, it's playing just fine. This really was another amazing game on the PC. A big open world, and you know, it almost felt like a role-playing game too. The way you could, you know, grow your character over time, and the missions and the story. Really big, wide open game, and the city was just so huge and lots of stuff to discover. No game really before that had done the big open world to the complexity that this game did. GTA 3 almost nailed it, but this one really was when GTA started to come into its own, in my opinion. Then I wanted to try Battlefield 4. It's not super old, but, you know, it's not super new either. It's kind of a middle-of-the-road game in terms of how much horsepower you need to run it. We're running at 1080p with low settings and 50% resolution scale, which brings the graphics down to about 720p. I could get the overlay working in this one again, but I could tell just from how it played, it was running at about 30 frames per second, with the occasional dip down. I think you could disable some of the shadows and stuff to get it running even better, but, you know, I played a couple of rounds and I had a good time playing it. You know, obviously not ideal playing a competitive shooter with less than 30 FPS, but, you know, it works well enough, and I mean, you can play, technically. I did, and I still had a good time playing it, so, you know, old card, slightly newer game, you could make it work if you're dedicated. And now we're playing Tomb Raider, the original Tomb Raider. Well, not the original, you know, the the reboot original. Running at 900p with a low medium mix. And I think we're gonna get average of about 40 FPS here. Totally playable, you know. I played this game on a similar resolution with a similar FPS when it first came out. You know, back in the day, this game was kind of a good benchmark game. You know, this was the gold standard for, you know, game graphics. It's aged very well, in my opinion. You know, still looks great, still plays great. Totally worth playing this game. Now on to Skyrim. This isn't the special edition, this is the original Skyrim, and we're running at 900p with a medium settings. I didn't use the FPS counter, but I'm pretty sure we're getting around 50 FPS in this little playthrough here. This is another one of those games that's been really, really well optimized, and it runs on almost anything. It's just, you know, it'll run on a potato if you really want to play it. And honestly, this is one of my favorite games of all time. It's so big, so deep, the story is so good, the world is just so well put together and so immersive. The graphics are great, you know, as you could see. It's not running on high-end hardware here at all, and, you know, it still looks really good. You know, you could even lower the graphics down to like 720p, and you'd be able to put a couple of the details up to maximum, and you'd probably get 60 FPS if that's important to you. I feel like a single-player game like this, you're totally fine running at, you know, 40, 50 FPS, and you definitely get that with it, even on an old card like this. Then we're going to Assassin's Creed. This is the original Assassin's Creed. We're running at 900p with the medium settings. I haven't played this game in so long. The original was the one I played, and it was on the Xbox 360. I used to say that it felt like a game from the future, just because the graphics were so much better than, you know, lots of the games that were out at the time. But the gameplay, the way your character moved through the world, and parkour, climbing around, big open world, and no game had really done that before this one. You know, the closest thing was, I guess, games like Prince of Persia. And I think this game was supposed to be a sequel to Prince of Persia originally, but it really did feel like leaps and bounds away from any other game that was around at the time. Just playing it now for the first time in, oh gosh, around 10 years or something, it holds up really well. You know, I was playing this on the PC just now, and it felt like a modern game. It really did. It felt just like another good old Assassin's Creed game. I love Assassin's Creed, one of my favorite franchises. And this was the game that got me hooked on the series. And it really is a great game. And it's held up great over the years. I installed this game just to test this card, and I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna keep playing this game. I'd forgotten how much I love it. And then we come to our first big disappointment. This is Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. And I guess it was kind of silly to expect this to play well on this card. I'm only running at 720p here with the lowest settings, and we can't even keep 15 FPS. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Even when I lower it down to 800 by 600, it still can't keep a playable FPS. It's a more modern game though, definitely much more demanding than the original Assassin's Creed. Kinda silly, I guess, to expect it to run well, but I was kinda secretly hoping it would. C'est la vie. It's a good game, just it wasn't destined to be played on an ancient card like this. And now we come to the wall of shame. Modern games that just are not gonna run on this card. Mostly because of, you know, it's only a DX10 card. Far Cry Primal didn't run. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, nope, not gonna run for us. DirectX 11. Forza Horizon, again, nope, we're just gonna get an error message for that one. Doom, this thing runs on almost anything, but nope, not this card. Fortnite, nope, nope. Witcher 3, no, it's not gonna run for us. Oh man, I was starting to get worried we couldn't run any modern games, but sure enough, GTA 5 to the rescue. This thing runs on anything. Running at 720p with normal settings to get a decent frame rate, averaging about 35 FPS. This was one of the only modern games I could get to run on this card. You know, any game that requires DirectX 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, or, you know, this is maximum DirectX 10 on this card, so lots of modern games aren't going to run very well. 3D games, I should say. I mean, there's lots of modern games that'll run on this card, but, you know, we're talking talking about games with good 3D graphics here. And yeah, most modern games with decent graphics require DirectX 11, unfortunately. But, you know, there is a few, and GTA 5 is one, and this game is so well optimized. It runs on almost anything. This one is really the gold standard for just, you know, how to optimize your game to get it to run on the most vast variety of different hardware configurations. It looks amazing, obviously. Everybody loves GTA 5. It's a really fun, really great game, single player game. It's awesome. You can play multiplayer. If you're building a budget computer with a cheap graphics card, if it can't run GTA 5, it's not a good setup. This is the benchmark. This is the level you have to meet to have a budget gaming rig that's worthwhile. There was a couple other modern games I could get to run. You know, here's Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. I had to turn off the shadows, as you saw there. There's some shadow glitches with the shadows on, unfortunately. But, you know, it ran 900p, low settings, and we're getting around 55 FPS. Not bad, to be honest. This is the remake, not the original. I'm sure the original would run better. Civilization 5 is another game that ran fine. I was running this at 1080p with medium settings, and it was running just fine. You know, there's lots of strategy games and just, you know, more modern games with lower quality graphics that, you know, just aren't very demanding. As long as they don't require DirectX 11 or 12, they'll run just fine on a card like this. You know, Civilization, these 4X games, Crusader Kings, Grand Strategy games, they'll run just fine, as long as they are running on DirectX 10. And then I wanted to try some emulation, so I figured I'd start out by testing some PSP. So I'm firing up Need for Speed here, and I'm running this at my native monitor resolution. So this is upscaled to 1080p. No frame skip or anything, and it's running just fine. Running really well, to be honest. You can probably run pretty much any PSP game. Some of them you might need to turn off the frame scaling. PS2 was not as well received, to be honest. It seemed to run fine sometimes, but then there was just a ton of slowdown. This is the PCSX2 emulator. I'm pretty sure you could do something about the frame rate. I didn't want to mess around with it. Same thing with Dreamcast. Here's Crazy Taxi running on the Redream emulator, and there was no sound, and then when the sound started, it was super stuttery, running pretty slow. I do think you should be able to run PS2 and Dreamcast on this card. Technically, it should have the horsepower. I mean, here we're gonna fire up some GameCube, and you see, it runs fine, you know? 50 frames per second here. This is the European version of this game. European version games run at 50 frames per second. So if GameCube runs this well, then Dreamcast and PS2 should be able to run fine. You might be able to get them to run if you switch the emulators or switch around the settings or the cores or the plugins or whatever. I didn't want to mess around with it. More of a proof of concept more than anything. Well, jumping over to Nintendo 64, I knew this was gonna run fine, so firing up Cruis'n World, which is one of the harder ones to run, it's running at full speed. It's, you know, no problems at all. I figured I could even upscale the resolution as well, so firing up Donkey Kong at 4x resolution. This is basically running at 1080p, and yeah, it's running totally fine. No problems at all. So I know there's a single N64 game you couldn't run at full speed, even if you are upscaling the graphics. These old games, they're really fun, and they look great when they're upscaled too, so I highly recommend doing this. Nintendo 64 ran very well, so I figured Sega Saturn would probably have a pretty good chance of running well. Firing up Panzer Dragoon here, and yeah, you can see it's running without a problem. This game is one of the more demanding Sega Saturn games, so, you know, if this runs fine, then pretty much anything will run fine. I don't like upscaling the Sega Saturn games for some reason. PlayStation 1 games too, I like playing them at their native resolution. There's something weird when you upscale them. Like the the resolution doesn't match the quality of the graphics. I think they look great in their old school retro look. And now we'll try a few lower end systems. Oh, by the way, this emulation front end, this is a RetroBat. This is an emulation front end that you could run from Windows. I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to set this up, so subscribe to the channel if you want to see that. Here we are testing out some Mame. Mame works fine, as you would expect. No problems at all, no slowdown, anything like that. Every single game I tested worked fine. Here's Marvel vs. Capcom, my favorite fighting game on the arcade. Running totally fine, totally responsive. All my moves went off without a problem, so yeah, no issues at all. I'll jump over to Super Nintendo real quick. Fired up some Yoshi's Island. One of the harder to run games on the SNES. Harder to emulate, I should say. And run it totally fine here. No issues. Honestly, I don't think lots of these low-end systems really put much stress on the GPU. You could probably run this emulator without any graphics card at all, so it doesn't really say much for my old 9800 GT, to be honest. But, you know, it works, so there's that. No emulation test would be complete without testing Game Boy Advance. That's my favorite retro system. I don't know that I'd actually want to play Game Boy Advance games on a big screen. Maybe I would, to be honest, actually, now that I think about it. I was playing Advance Wars 2 here for the little demo, and I was thinking to myself that, yeah, this isn't so bad playing on a big screen, but for the most part, I think Game Boy Advance games should be played on a handheld system. They look great on a handheld, just not as good on a screen, in my opinion. So, there you have it, the 9800 GT BFG edition. This was not a top-of-the-line card when it came out, and it's definitely not a top-of-the-line card now, but it was what I could afford at the time. And the games that this card let me play, I'll never forget those good times playing games, and it was a fun time to reminisce and replay some of these old games again for you guys now. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the video. Please let me know in the comments below. What do you think of the 9800 GT? Do you have any old graphics cards that captured your heart back in the day? I'd love to hear from you down there. And while you're down there, give me a thumbs up if you like the video, or a thumbs down if you didn't like it for some reason. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. I'm Tech Dweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.